Welcome everybody to today's webinar, 5 Coaching Skills That Every Leader Should Master. This event is brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Mary Pellet and I work in the alumni office, and I'm so glad that you could join us today from wherever you are, whether you're live or you're joining us in the recorded version of today's event. The webinar is going to last around 45 minutes, and we're going to have time at the end for questions. If you have questions throughout the presentation, please enter them into the chat box, and we will address them either during the presentation or at the end. In a moment, I'm going to share a link with you all in the chat box, and it directs you to a handout that you can use during today's presentation. As I mentioned, we are recording today's webinar, and I'll post it on our career page of our website called vuconnect.com in the coming days. And I will be sharing it with you all who are in attendance at today's event. Many of you know today's presenter, Hallie Crawford. She has presented for the Alumni Association many times, and we're so grateful that she's back today. Hallie Crawford is a graduate of Vanderbilt in the year 1995, and she has been a certified career coach, speaker, author, and national career expert since 2002. Her company, Create Your Career Path, is headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia, and she has been regularly featured in the media, including with Forbes, CNN, Money Magazine, and the Wall Street Journal. She has her undergraduate degree from Vanderbilt, as I mentioned, and a graduate degree from the University of Illinois. They have over 2,000 success stories with her company of her team of coaches and resume writers who help professionals find jobs that they love and make them want to jump out of bed in the morning. Having trouble with my words today, but thank you so much, Hallie, for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you.
It's all good. Thank you, Mary. Really appreciate it. And I'm so excited to be here with you all today. These webinars for my fellow alum are especially near and dear to my heart. And this topic is something that I absolutely love. It's one of my favorite topics because we love to train our clients as much as we can on some of the basic coaching skills so that they can be better leaders, better managers, better teammates. And just so you know too, I know that the title is a little bit different than what I have on the slide here. I should honestly kind of combine them because we are going to be talking about 5 coaching skills. So just FYI there. And they're the skills that we feel like leaders really need to master. And if they do that, they will just be so much better in so many different ways. Within their organization, within their team, their professional life, etc. And I would say, honestly, related to this first slide here too, that these coaching skills are that much more important in our new normal of, remote work, of the hybrid model. Even if you're back in person, like it takes some getting used to getting back to whatever our new normal is going to be. So all of those things are going to be relevant. As Mary said, I'm a certified career coach. I've been coaching and training for just over 22 years now. I was lucky to kind of find my passion for my career in my mid 20s and started my business in my late 20s when I was living in Chicago. And the advice that we're going to give you all today is advice that we give to all of our clients. So we've got several coaches on our team and resume writers, etc. And we want people to be in jobs that they truly enjoy and succeed in those jobs. So everything that we're going to be talking about today, just so you know, will be relevant whether you're a manager actually leading a team or not. And also whether you're a new manager or you've been a manager for a really long time. It's relevant across the board. And as we talk about these, and I'll bring up our agenda here on the next slide, as we talk about these, some of you may feel like, okay, like this one skill I'm already pretty good at, and it may give you some more ideas about how to just continue to, stay relevant with that skill. And for some of the other skills, it might be something that's brand new to you. So I would say as you go through what we're talking about today, and if we can go ahead and launch our first poll here, that would be great, Mary, right out of the box, is try to pinpoint one coaching skill that we discussed that you think is going to be the most relevant for your situation and one that would be most helpful for you as a leader as well, like something that you may not be doing as well as you would like to. And we're really curious first with our first poll, why you're interested in developing coaching skills, kind of what bucket you fall into. And what we're going to be talking about today is the definition of coaching and what we mean by that from like a pure, true sense. 5 critical coaching skills that will help you as a leader. And we'll give you some suggested homework. We'll have time for discussing action items at the end, as well as some time to answer some questions. We also know that many of you submitted some questions in advance, which are great. We'll try to get through as many of those as we can today. And for any of those that are really, really specific, if you feel like you need more specific advice for your unique situation, you can always set up a quick call with me. Happy to do that. And I'll show you how to do that on the next slide. Okay, so we've got our results. This is great. So far, the majority, but it's kind of a mix, which is interesting. 33% are saying managing difficult employees. These are skills that will help you with that. And again, we can answer some questions that are more specific at the end. And 26% are second in line would be taking on more senior leadership roles. So we've got a really good mix here, which is fantastic. And please know that the skills, again, that we're talking about today will go across the board there, but you may say, for example, with your situation, et cetera, 1 or 2 is more relevant for your situation. You will receive a copy of the recording, as Mary mentioned. And if any of you, though, would also like a copy of the slides, feel free to email us at admin@createyourcareerpath, listed on the slide here. We'd be happy to share those with you. And this is also a way that you can email me questions later on if you think of questions after the fact, even if it's a couple weeks later. And also a way to set up a quick time to chat with me a little bit more to get some questions answered, but also talk more about our coaching services as well. Happy to do that. So as we all know, I think all of us are kind of like this woman on the slide here in a way, where it's like, we are trying to adjust to whatever the new normal is for our situation. And we had a lot of things happen during COVID that people have just like, the work-life balance got really, really blurred. There were fewer boundaries. We felt less connected to our organizations. I think that's getting a lot better now that we're going back to the office. But one of the things, or the reasons why I mention this for our purposes today, is to understand as a leader that the people that are around you or report to you, they are going to probably or have felt and still maybe do a lot of different feelings about how work is now. And some people might love remote work and actually don't want to come to into the office at all. Some people might like or prefer a hybrid model. Some people want to be back in the office all the time. And so one of the things we need to do as leaders these days is, it's a little bit harder, I think, but we have to be a little bit more mindful of these different work styles and who works better in what scenario and situation. And the second thing to be considering is, especially for those employees maybe that work with you, if they're remote, even part of the time, they're going to be lacking some of the context that they might be getting being in the office. And so we have to err on the side, I think, kind of across the board of over communicating versus under communicating with those people that work with us or for us. And then the third thing, and then we'll move to the next slide here. The other thing that I think has changed that I think we've all heard about and been talking about is this idea of where some employees are like quiet quitting. I don't really like the word because I think it's not really accurate because people aren't literally necessarily quitting, but where it's just more important for employees, I think more so than ever before, to feel fulfilled in their job and like they're making a difference and, having some sense of meaning from what they do. And they also really want, as much as possible, that sense of work-life balance. So these are things that we've got to just pay attention to a little bit more and ask people questions about what they want. Not that we have to give it to them every single time, but try to at least tune into and show that you're willing to listen and that you care as a leader, okay? So I know that was kind of long-winded there, but there were a lot of different effects, obviously, from working remotely, et cetera. So let's talk next about how we define coaching so that you know kind of where we're coming from when we talk about these different coaching skills. So coaching in its truest form in an ideal world, which obviously we don't live in one, so it's not always like this, but in an ideal world, it's helping someone learn in order to improve their performance. So coaching is supposed to be about asking the right questions at the right time for people, sometimes maybe giving them feedback and input. But at the end of the day, it's helping them figure things out on their own and having them be more introspective and self-reflective so that they can learn something more on their own. We learn better when we figure it out on our own, as we know. So if you look at the right-hand side of this slide here, coaching is not technically about issuing instructions, telling people what to do. It's more supposed to be about helping someone see something in a different way, showing them a different way or a different perspective to take on something, maybe giving them feedback along the way or explaining something but letting them figure out the rest. And it's also about encouraging as well, okay? And this is where we're coming from when we're talking about coaching skills today. What we want you to know is we don't expect you to be a coach every single second of the day. If you're a boss and a manager, you do have to tell people what to do, and you cannot go with everything that they say. We realize that. But if you can start to infuse a little bit of a sense of this element of coaching into your leadership style, you will go really, really far with your employees by listening to them more. They'll feel like you empathize with them more, et cetera, all the stuff we'll talk about today. So coaching is supposed to be a method to provide guidance to professionals that helps empower them to find their own answers as much as possible. It's not therapy, but feelings can come up when you're putting your coach hat and talking with someone, because we are going to be encouraging you to ask people questions about how they feel about the project that they're working on. If someone seems disgruntled or is being difficult, to figure out a little bit more what's going on with them. So feelings may come up as appropriate in a professional setting. And it's also, as we said earlier, it's not about just flat out telling people what to do. It's about asking the right questions, which we'll kind of teach you about a little bit as we go today. So the 5 coaching skills that we want leaders to learn, especially these days because of everything that's going on. And sorry if you hear a little jingling in the background, my dog is trotting around. He always likes to do that at the opportune time. The foundational skills for coaching that we want you to learn are designing your relationships proactively and more effectively. We'll talk today too about the 3 levels of listening, how we define those and how to practice that a little bit more. The third one is an introduction to this idea of powerful questions, then recognizing other people's strengths, how to do that and why that's so important. And 5 would be how to develop your own unique leadership strengths and identifying and kind of assessing where your strengths are and where some of your challenges are so that we can start to work on those a little bit more. So if we dive right in here, let's talk about number 1, and this is designing your relationships and doing this a little bit more formally and proactively, so to speak. And I'm going to list these things out and then we'll get to our second poll here in just a moment. So this idea of designing your relationships, just by the way, is great. If you've got a new team and you're just starting out with them, you can design it proactively, upfront, sets the stage really well, fantastic. But even if you've been managing for a little while or your team is not new, you can still kind of take a step back and come up with like a team charter or team agreement to help you better work with the people that you manage, etc. And by the way, these agreements or team charters don't just have to be with groups of people. You can also have an agreement one-on-one with someone, especially someone who is, for example, maybe a difficult employee. Maybe there's a different way that you guys need to work out that you work together more effectively, okay? So the reason why we have you design or structure your relationships more proactively is on the right-hand side of the slide. And this also gives you a couple of things that you consider or can consider when you're talking about structuring the relationship. So this is about structuring relationships. It can be about structuring your conversations more thoughtfully, and even meetings more so in advance, and having agreements in advance help that set the stage for a good working relationship. So for example, you may need to agree to confidentiality if you're talking with someone about something that should be kept confidential. You may need to, as a leader, do a little bit better job of explaining your style and your strengths and desires, and explaining that a little bit more directly and openly with the people that you work with, because you can't just assume they're going to understand like what your style is. So for example, if you're more extroverted than introverted, and you tend to do better by talking things through with people, and let them know like, hey, emails are fine for me, but when there's a complex project, or something we need to talk about in a little bit greater depth, I'm going to lean on a phone call with you or an in-person meeting. It's important to help people understand that they can be vulnerable or open when appropriate, so that they can let you know as a leader, for example, that they're frustrated working with this particular client and they need help. It's a good idea to establish soft goals for your conversations and meetings that you have. So as we all know, we go into a meeting or a conversation or with an agenda of, okay, these are the 5 topics we need to cover. Start including in there, even if you keep that to yourself, I want our team to come out of this meeting feeling stronger about, or more behind or excited about the project that we're working on. Or in this meeting, I want to dig into some details, and I want people to put on their thinking caps a little bit more. So have soft goals for meetings as well as those hard, tangible goals too. And sometimes, depending on the person and the situation, we may need to check in regarding like people's feelings and how they're doing, and why are they being difficult? What's going on for them underneath? Are they frustrated with something that you would like them to try to share with you so that you can help them a little bit more when that's appropriate to do so? So we'll go ahead and launch our second poll here. And one of the things that we want you to think about is, if we are trying to encourage people on our team to be a little bit more willing to be open with us so that the lines of communication are open and more productive, what are some of the things that help you be more open with someone else? And those are the types of things that you could start to emulate a little bit more as a leader, that could help you if one of your issues is people are just kind of not sharing ideas, they're not asking questions, they're not kind of working together as effectively as you would like. If you want to set a really good kind of open communication loop, what are the things we need to focus on? So far we've got trust as the top one, which makes perfect sense. We'll give you a moment to fill this out. And while we're doing this too, I'm actually going to go to the next slide here so you all can take a look at it as you're filling this out as well. And it looks like trust is still going to win out, which makes perfect sense. The things that we are talking about today, everyone, all of the coaching skills will help with establishing or demonstrating greater empathy, as well as establishing greater trust. That's like the whole point of today, if nothing else, if you will. And keep in mind too, with our second one, other people being open with me helps you feel, more willing to share. This is where you could think about, do I need to share sometimes a little bit more about what's going on with me with my team, or examples of when I made a mistake so that I feel more approachable? That could be a strategy that you could use as appropriate, depending on what's going on for your situation. We had a CEO who I worked with a long time ago in Idaho when I was doing an MBA workshop, and he said he realized kind of early on to founding his company and running it, that people were intimidated by him. He was a really big guy, had a booming voice, he was in charge. And so he started to share times earlier in his career, stories about when he made mistakes. And it started to change the tide, or turn the tide and shift the culture of his organization once he started being a little bit more vulnerable. One of the other things that you want to think about when you're creating this agreement, or I should say, kind of the reason you might create an agreement before a conversation, a meeting, or within your team, is it helps when we have kind of some ground rules for engagement, if you will. It helps create a safer space for us with touchy situations and also non-touchy situations. So for example, if we talk with our team about, hey everybody, when we have a disagreement, how are we going to handle that? What are some ideas about how to do that? then when you do have a disagreement or an issue, you've got something over here to point to, and it becomes less personal, and it's an easier way to manage around those different situations, okay? So it helps create the safe space. When you have an agreement about how you want to meet and how often, it's not just thinking about with this agreement, it's not just thinking about the work that you have to get done and the tasks that you have to perform. It's about figuring out how to work together more effectively. And I'll give you a quick example, and then I want to talk about this slide too, because I know we had some questions about difficult employees. When we first work with one of our coaching clients, we have an agreement that they read and sign and, you know, send back to us. And a couple of those things in the agreement are things like, we're going to be really direct and honest with you. Please don't be offended by that. That's why we're here, to ask you tough questions and give you feedback. And we discuss that with them in advance so they know what to expect. It's expectation setting, okay? And when you're in, or if you're in a touchy situation and going into a conversation where you need to give someone feedback, for example, that might be a little bit tough, it's a really good idea to kind of gut check the energy of the group or the one-on-one situation. Like, how does this person seem to be feeling? Are they kind of wound up and stressed and seem on edge? Do you need to talk with them for a few minutes about just in general, like let them vent for a second, or ask them how they're doing or feeling? Let them know it's okay to share some of their frustrations with you for a minute so you can kind of get that out of the way. The second thing that you can do is on the middle of the slide here. If you have to give someone touchy feedback, for example, let them know they're not doing something as well as they could be or whatever it is, tell them or ask them in advance, is it okay if I share something with you that may be a little bit difficult to hear? Do you mind if we talk about that right now? Get permission and ask permission first. That will help get their guard down so that you can go into that conversation and let them know, even as part of this, I'm telling you this because I care about your growth and I want to get to a good spot here. So ask permission first, and then let them know that you're on their side. And then another great way to handle touchy situations is to ask questions first. Ask a lot of questions. It shows empathy, it helps build trust, it shows that you care. And then you can get into discussing and sharing your opinions and what you guys need to do differently. But leverage this idea of asking better and more questions as much as possible as a leader, because that's something, if nothing else from today, that you take away from this is it's the ability to ask really good questions, because we tend to, not just as leaders, but as human beings, we tend to want to dive in and fix something and tell someone what to do. And that is not always the best route to take. Tip number 2, or coaching skill number 2, would be what we call in the coaching world 3 levels of listening. So we have 3 levels. We've all heard about active listening and how important that is, yada, yada, I know. The thing we want you to think about today is our 3 levels are, number 1 is we all have internal listening. That's the first one, listening to your own inner voice. That sounds hard. This meeting is boring. I'm hungry, whatever it is. We all have to be there to take care of ourselves, but we want you to be as leaders in levels 2 and 3 as much as possible. And that is focused listening, level 2, where you're really focused on the other person and you're making a conscious effort to listen, not just to what they're saying to you, but also what they're not saying to you, and their nonverbals, and paying attention to that. Because if we can be much more at this level and also at level 3, which is on this next slide here, we are going to be more in tune with the undercurrents of what is going on and have the ability to maybe call some things out a little bit more in the right way and figure out, for example, if someone is saying one thing, but they really mean the other and they're not quite comfortable with us, you know, being like totally open and sharing. So level 3 listening and coaching is what we call global listening. It's the energy within your team. How are they feeling? Are they excited because they're brand new and you want to harness that and even ask them maybe, how do we keep this momentum going? Any ideas? That could be a great question to ask them. How the energy may be changing or how it's changed over time if you've managed your team for a long time. Are people sad, frustrated? Are they scared because they're worried about a recession and you need to talk with people and about that a little bit more, or just give them this sense of like stability, for example. And it's also about tuning into the mood or the tone of the conversation that you're having one-on-one with them too. And the ways that we can do this global listening, if you will, is to take a little less time talking in your meetings and take a little bit more time being quiet and letting other people talk. Being okay with a pause during the meeting, for example, because that gives people airtime to kind of think about maybe and process something. Sometimes we need to still our body. Sometimes we need to slow down what we're saying, like literally talk slower than we normally do. Sometimes we need to be mindful of not stepping over something that someone said just because you feel like you don't have time to deal with it right now. You might say, look, that's a really important point. I don't feel like we can discuss it right this second, but let's bookmark it. And I'd like to talk with you offline about it so that you don't step over things because you want to avoid it because it seems hard or difficult, or you don't have enough time. Sometimes you may need to slow the other person down in a one-on-one conversation. If they say something to you and your inclination is to be like, okay, well, but let's talk about this. Hold on a second and pay attention to what they just said to you, because it actually could be really, really important. And let's go ahead and launch our third poll here, Mary, if we could, because we're curious based on what we've said so far, how you feel about your own listening skills. But the other thing is sometimes we might need to interrupt someone and just say, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but can you repeat that for a second? Because I feel like that was important. And sometimes we do need to guide them, or sometimes we might need to ask them a question rather than give advice, and be more mindful of that. This can be an incredibly powerful way to develop greater trust between your team, between employees, with a difficult employee, et cetera, et cetera. Now we realize as you're completing this poll, there is no magic wand for this. Situations can get really difficult, and there could be times when after you've employed some of these techniques that you may feel like you need to bring in a third party like HR or get some help with it, and that's completely acceptable too. But try these first and see how it goes, and realize that changing and shifting the culture and of a team and the tone of a one-on-one relationship with someone, it takes time. It's not a light switch. So you've got to put these things into place and be consistent with them in order to shift the tone in a positive direction, if you will. And so far we have 67% are saying yes, they do, which is awesome. You may have picked up a nugget or two here about, like, for example, slowing down a little bit more. I tend to talk really, really fast. And so sometimes when I'm on the phone with someone, I might actually just literally like put my hand over my mouth for a second, because I know I need to let them finish because it's really important. So a few different things that you can employ. And we've got 33% are saying no, they don't. So if out of all three of these, you want to pay attention to level 3 the most, that's what we would say, okay? Our third coaching skill for today too is guiding, or this idea or concept, if you will, of guiding people, not advising them. And bottom line, it's about what we would call using powerful questions, okay? So if you take a look at this next slide here and start on the left, powerful questions are basically questions that are open-ended. They're kind of like childlike, if you will, like, so you can pretend like you were a kid, maybe, if you're trying to practice with these. They don't have judgment in them, so there's no opinion or judgment in them, and it allows the employee, the coworker, etc., to experiment with their own answers and come up with their own answers and really think deeply about something. So we really like these a lot, and as coaches, this is one of our #1 tools. Powerful questions are open-ended. They will not allow for a yes or no response. And that's the way you know if it's a powerful question or not. So if you take a look at the middle here, some examples are on the slide. How can we work together more effectively? After you let someone vent a little bit, or even if you're starting a new team, you could say, hey, how can we work together effectively, everyone? Let's talk about meetings. Let's talk about conversations. Let's talk about goals, et cetera, et cetera. A second question, or another example, is what do you want to achieve with this project? Another one is, what's another choice you could make? And the cool thing that we find about powerful questions is also that they assume a positive outcome. They don't allow for you guys to go into this pit or hole of like, well, this isn't going to work and yada, yada. if you read these and think about them, a really, really good, powerful question is not just yes or no, but it also assumes that there is some way to compromise, or there is a way to kind of come together and work this out and achieve a positive result. And that's part of what's really cool about them, okay? This is all based in this idea of leveraging curiosity. So that's why this is connected to this idea of powerful questions. So if you're wondering, gosh, how do I start using these a little bit more? We'll give you some ideas and suggestions. But if you try to either pretend like you're a kid for a few minutes and just ask questions from there, just put on your curiosity hat and say that to yourself, like, let me just get really curious with this person at the very beginning of our conversation, because maybe I can get some stuff out of them that helps explain why they're being difficult. What else is going on for them? So curiosity and leveraging this and using powerful questions is, it's not about judgment or opinion unless it's the right time to do so. So for example, if you've used curiosity for a little while in your conversation, but at the end it's time to make some decisions and be a manager and a boss, you might say, here are the 3 things that I'd like to try. Let's go with those. If you stay present in levels 2 and 3 listening, you'll be better at using or leveraging curiosity for these questions. And it's really, really important. Yes, we want you to be able to offer your opinion, and absolutely you need to do that. We get that, and you have to make decisions. But it's really good, even before you do that, to make an effort to understand other people's perspective before you make those decisions. It doesn't mean that you have to take their, perspective into account if it's not really the right way to go, but at least they have felt heard at the end of the day. And a great way to practice with powerful questions is over the course of the next couple of weeks, when you're having conversations with your employees or friends or family members, to practice either just listening to them and reflecting back what they're saying to you. Don't even ask any questions and don't give any advice. That is really hard. We had to do that in coaching school, and it was very difficult. And a second thing you could do is to only ask powerful questions the whole time and don't give any advice whatsoever, to kind of build up that muscle. You do get better at this, but you have to be mindful of it, okay? As part of these powerful questions, or this concept of this, we wanted to share this model that we really like. It's from the Gallup organization, which owns the StrengthsFinder assessment, which some of you have probably heard about. And they assert that these are the 4 needs of followers. I personally am not a fan of the idea or the name of follower. Just imagine that a follower is anyone, including you, that is, an employee of an organization. But one of the ways that you could start to identify the things that you need to be working on to strengthen your team, the things that you may need to be working on if your team is becoming a little dysfunctional, or if you're having a difficult time with a particular employee, is what is going on with this person? Is there a lack of trust of you or of the organization going on? Is there a lack of sense of stability, a lack of sense of compassion or hope? We all need these 4 things as human beings, I would say, but as followers of any organization. We want to know that we can trust our boss, our coworkers to get their job done, that our company or organization is going to be honest with us and treat us with integrity and respect as much as possible. We want a sense of stability in our jobs. We know, obviously, no job is completely stable, but that you as a leader are providing, that you're building a sense of trust with your team, and you're also providing a sense of stability, that everything's going to be okay, that you're encouraging them, that you have their back, that you're there to support them, that you won't throw them under the bus, and that you are strong enough as a leader to kind of walk them through even difficult times. Followers also want to have a sense of compassion, and we talked about this earlier, that you care about them not just as an employee, but as a person, that you want them to be happy in their jobs and have a sense of fulfillment. So asking them if they enjoy this particular project or not so much. Are they leveraging their strengths in a way that they want to be leveraging them is a great question too. And finally, giving them a sense of hope that we are headed in a direction. We are working on this project that's aligned with the vision and the mission of the organization, that they have a sense of hope, that they believe in their organization and their leaders as well. That's a really important need that we have too. So print this out. As we said earlier, you can ask us for a copy of the slides. I'll bring that up. This is where you can email us, admin, blah, blah, blah. You can email us for the slides. But print this out, put it on your desk, and let it sit there for a couple of days as you're thinking about maybe a difficult employee that you're working with, or what part of the model you want to focus on first with your brand new team, and how can you start incorporating those things into your meetings on a regular basis. We know that some of this stuff might get really specific, as we said earlier, some of your questions may be really specific. Happy to do a free strategy session with anyone who's listening in later or on the call today. We'll give you some advice about what to do next, and happy to talk with you about coaching as well. So this 4 needs of followers, we just really like this model a lot. We've shared it with our clients before, and it's not always something that, again, it's not always a light switch where they're like, oh, I know exactly what's going on here. But over time, they'll start to realize, oh, this is why my organization is dysfunctional. It's in the hope category, or whatever category it may be, okay? Coaching skill number 4 is to be more mindful and aware and proactive about recognizing other people's strengths. We really like the Gallup organization, so we use their models a lot. This is another one from them. And I know this sign model, it's a little bit fuzzy on the screen. It just kind of pixelated when we made it bigger. You need to pay attention to, and not just be mindful of, okay, so-and-so is supposed to do this job and this is his role and yada, yada. But is he in the right type of job? Is he in a place that he's leveraging his strengths? Am I giving him opportunities to leverage those strengths enough? And do I even know what his strengths are in the first place? So the way that you can start to be more mindful and aware of recognizing other people's strengths is using the sign model, and just starting to notice and observe when the people on your team seem like they're being really effective in certain situations versus in other situations. Where do they seem to shine, and also seem to get excited and actively look forward to something? So this is the instinct part. So where are they effective, and up and down, kind of noticing those trends and themes? Where do they get excited and enthusiastic and just seem a little bit more lit up when you're talking to them about a particular issue or client or whatever it is? When they seem really, really focused, like they're in the groove and in the flow, paying attention to that with each member of your team. And when they're finished with something, who feels really fulfilled and authentic and seems to be really satisfied, and who ends up seeming like they're still kind of frustrated and annoyed or not as excited? You may need to make some changes to your team based on what's going on there and what role they play. You may need to give them opportunities to play to their strengths a little bit more. So it's not just about you and your leadership strengths, which we will talk about next as our 5th tip, but it's also about really being more proactive about not just assigning people what they need to do, but recognizing and paying attention to what their strengths are, what motivates them, what their values are, what their personality type and style is, so that you can understand how to work with them more effectively. We all know that there's people out there, some people do better when you walk into their office to chat with them for a few minutes if you ask them how their weekend went, because they just warm up. They like that personal connection and communication, versus another person who could care less about that. And you need to just walk into their office and say, you know, hey, Susan, can I talk to you about this particular issue? And she's like, yeah, sure, let's talk, whatever it is. So being mindful of how everyone is so completely different, which I realize is a challenge for managers, and how you can adjust your style and strengths to each person a little bit more. Coaching skill number 5 is to be mindful too of your strengths and weaknesses and developing your own unique leadership style. There is no one exact right way to lead people. We gave you the tips and tools to help lead people in a better way that's unique to your style. What we want people to realize is what your strengths are and what your challenges are, so that you can get support and help from your team in those areas maybe where you don't shine as much, okay? When you're thinking about your own leadership style as part of this exercise today, it's a really good idea to think about pros and cons to you as a leader. Where are you doing well and where are you not doing as well? And how can you get help with those areas that you aren't doing as well in, and play to those strengths that you do have? So what your strengths are, what your skills are, what your values are, because the values that you have as a leader, they're going to come through in your leadership style just automatically, because we can't not like live according to our values. It's just kind of who we are as a person. And also what your personality type is. So are you more introverted and extroverted? And maybe some of the people on your team, if you're introverted, they want to talk with you more. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't talk to you as much. This is overwhelming me. You can let them know I'm a little bit more of an introvert. So do you mind if you hold your questions like till the end of each week, for example? That would help me a lot. And I will try to meet you halfway to kind of, meet with you a little bit more. So thinking about what your strengths are and your personality type, we really like at the bottom left-hand side of this page, the Strengths Finder assessment. And there's one that is for leadership-based strengths as well, which we love. That can help you get a sense of where you shine. And then our last model before we go to action steps and Q&A, this is our last slide before that, is to use this top 10 leadership skills wheel from Development Dimensions International. It's a highly regarded management consulting firm. And these are some of the top 10 leadership skills they feel are really important in today's environment. And if you can print this out and rank yourself in each area, you'll get a sense of several things. Number one, where you're doing well and where you're not doing as well. Number two, it could remind you of some leadership strengths that you didn't even think about. Like, for example, leading across generations, you might be like, oh, that's actually one of my problems. And I didn't even think about that the age thing could be part of what's going on. And for some of you, some of these areas may not be relevant. You may work in a team where there aren't age gaps, and that's okay too. A great thing to do is ask your own boss to rank you in each of these areas, and maybe even a friend or family member, so that you can get an objective opinion too, as well as your own self-assessment, okay? So far, we hope this is helpful for you. What we'd love for you to do at this point is to go ahead and write down one action step that you will take in the next week. We know that we've given you a lot of information. So just to kind of remind you, we've got the powerful questions exercise of really practicing with questions that are really open-ended. We've got the active listening where you're slowing yourself down and paying a little bit more attention to the energy in the room, what's going on, and not stepping over things that, could be really, really important. Filling out the leadership wheel and understanding what your strengths and weaknesses are. And also those one-on-one or team charters or team agreements that you can come up with for 5 minutes, just talk about, hey, everybody, can we talk at the beginning of our next meeting about how we're doing working together? And are there changes we want to make so that we can work together a little bit more effectively and continue to be productive? So write that down for us if you would. And we would love it if you share in the chat box. We'd love to see those. And feel free to enter in any questions that you have. And we've got the email address at the bottom to ask for the slides and also schedule that strategy session we talked about too. So Mary, if you can help me keep an eye on the chat box for questions, if we want to go ahead and start answering some of those that came out in advance, happy to do that.
Sure. So there is a question about applying these skills to one-on-one relationships and then in a group setting.
Yeah, that's really, really good. So I feel like all of these skills can be relevant in a one-on-one and group setting, depending on certain things. So I guess what I would say is I think all of the skills are relevant. And there are certain things, though, and certain questions and things you wouldn't say in a group that you would be better off saying one-on-one. For example, if something's confidential or if something would put someone on the spot. So I think, honestly, powerful questions are really good for team meetings, but because they invite so much conversation, or you may say to yourself, okay, I'm going to ask like 2 powerful questions each meeting, but that's it. Whereas if you had a one-on-one conversation with someone, you might have 3 or 4. So it's about like what's appropriate in a group setting versus otherwise. But for the most part, I think all of these are relevant kind of across the board. It's a really good question. Hope that starts answering.
Yeah, it seems like getting a copy of these slides would be really helpful. I see in the chat that someone would like for you to please reshare the assessment where you can score yourself or a colleague or ask your boss to score you. So I don't know if you want to reshare that now or
Yeah,
if we should
I
share
think
it
it's this one,
later.
right? Yeah, that would be
Yes.
my guess. Yep, no problem at
Yeah.
all.
Thank you for those that have been sharing your action steps. We see that people are going to practice active listening and filling this chart out as well.
Yeah, totally. I know, that's
Another
what I'm like too. What is it? Is it a chart? Is it a wheel? Whatever, we'll just go with wheel.
leadership skills. And then someone asked too, what to do if someone isn't really interested in being managed or coached? How could you implore these skills with them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there are people that come to us, so I can relate, who we honestly don't feel like are coachable. And for us, it's different, obviously, because we could say that to them and say, it might not be a fit for you to work with us. So, number one, if someone is non coachable like that, I would question whether they're a good fit, honestly, for your organization and to be on your team. Now, I wouldn't say like, oh, okay, fire them right out of the box. That's not what I mean. But I'm concerned with anyone who is really not coachable, because I just think it's going to be hard for them to be a team player and in the long run, maybe, be helpful. But you have to try, as we all know. And two things I would say is try this idea of powerful questions a little bit more. So instead of like feeling like, oh, I have to coach them and like, give them some crazy way to have a new perspective or see something in a different way, try some of the powerful questions just a little bit more and see if they, start to answer. And if those are things that end up not working for you, or you've already tried them and it hasn't worked, you may need to start giving like that more like direct feedback and ask permission to share a couple of things and say, look, this is difficult and we need to figure this out. How can we figure it out? You may need to be a little bit more direct. And the third thing you may have to do too, if worst case scenario, kind of step down, is if you have to bring in someone from HR. But I wouldn't let it fester, because you've got to figure out a way to get this person, in a better spot by asking the right questions, et cetera, like we said. And then you can decide, okay, do I need to put them on a performance review or whatever it is? It's a good question.
Thanks, Hallie. So someone's bringing up the idea, or just the fact that someone in there that they have to coach or work with has the lack of personal accountability. So how to work with that?
Something you could do is ask, either instead of giving them the answers, or instead of answering their email right away. We had one client say, I on purpose will wait 24 hours before I reply to some of my employees who I know can figure it out on their own, but they don't want to at the beginning. He would literally wait and they would figure it out on their own half the time. So there's kind of some like tricks that you can play. I hate to say tricks, not the right thing, you get it. But with this particular person, asking them, so what could we do differently? Is there anything that you feel you could do differently here? What are your ideas? So try to like force them to give some answers for that accountability a little bit more, as much as possible. And similar to what we said with the other question just a second ago, worst case scenario, if you have to give them that direct feedback, say, I need to talk with you about something that's a little bit tough. I need you to step up to the plate more because deadlines are being missed, et cetera, et cetera. Is there anything that's preventing you from being successful here? So those types of questions, like digging into what may be going on, could give you some answers about why they're not being accountable. Maybe they feel totally overwhelmed and they're freaked out and they just haven't told you. Okay, that was enough on that one. Hope it helped as a start.
And then we have a few questions where we're thinking less about an employee and more about someone who's a volunteer for our organization, maybe on a board, that kind of thing.
Those are a little bit tougher, right? Because they're not paid employees and we can't go in as much in hard driving in a lot of cases. I would be a little bit softer with it at the beginning and ask them, like right out of the box, what made you want to volunteer here? What would be your ideal, tasks that you could perform? Again, you don't have to give those to them necessarily, but dig a little bit deeper on why they're there so you can tap into that sense of fulfillment. Ask them what they think their strengths are and how they could best contribute to the organization. So don't just plug and play and say, you're doing this, they're doing this. Take a few minutes to kind of get to know them a little bit more so that you can be more tapped into what brings them there in the first place. And then hopefully you can meet that need a little bit more too. And at the end of the day, if a volunteer is making a mess and it's not working out though, and you have to say, thank you so much, but no thanks, you may have to do that in some cases. But in some cases, you can kind of just shift them into a different role maybe that would be a better fit for them and help that situation too.
Thank you so much, Hallie. You're giving us such great information. So we have a question that was submitted before that speaks to showing empathy and balancing that with things that just need to be said. Maybe how that fits in with coaching.
Great question. Ask a question first, then tell them. So if there is absolutely no time and it's an emergency and you have to go in and say, look, I'm sorry, I can't talk about this with you right now. I'm happy to talk about it afterwards, but I really need you to do X. Okay, fine. But in other scenarios, just ask a question first, and then get into it. So you can be empathetic with people, and there's understanding and telling people what to do, even if it doesn't have to be like two separate things. You could even say, I completely understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, we have to go this direction. I hope you can be on board with it. But please know, I really listened to what you said, and I'll try to incorporate it in some way, shape, or form. So that could be a way to think about it too.
Yeah, and then this question was just submitted in the chat, and it comes from more the perspective of the employee when the employer or the top leader of an organization isn't in really the position to be a great coach, or it doesn't really see that coaching helps make a team better.
Yeah. So two things I would say to this, because I know that plenty of us have been in this situation and maybe still now too. Number one, if the organization is floundering and not doing well because this person is behaving that way, I would question whether you'd want to stay there in the long run. I'm not saying quit tomorrow, but just, if people are not open-minded about stuff, it can be a red flag. The other thing I would say though too is try to do the coaching stuff within your own area and department, right? Like I'm assuming that the leader, the head of the organization, isn't always in your meetings and isn't always, let's say, in your one-on-one conversations. Do it anyway. Now, as long as you're not going to get, into trouble about it, and I don't see how you could if you're just asking better questions, etc. So I would try to practice and use these skills regardless, and then think in the long run too, as part of that, whether this is going to be the right place for you to be if the changes, can't come from the top down, because you might be able to affect change within your own department or within your own team. But if you're butting up against other teams that have no idea about this stuff, it could cause a problem for you in the long run. It's a really great question. Thanks for asking that one too. And I think we're getting close to time.
Yeah, we're getting close to time. So Hallie, if there's anything else you'd like to share with us, we'd love to hear that. And then I'll close us out.
Okay, sounds good. Give it time. Practice with all of this. Don't throw in the towel and say, okay, this person isn't going to work. Create a plan and say, okay, I'm going to try these tools, for example, for the next 2 or 3 weeks with this team, with this person. And if things don't improve, then I will take the harsher next step, if you will. This stuff takes time though. Put it into practice, see what happens. That would be my final thought.
Thank you so much, Hallie.